iDriveSoCal is brought to you by the very best auto retailers from across Southern California. When it's time for you to buy, or even just kick the tires on the idea of buying, just go to iDriveSoCal.com and click on dealers. iDriveSoCal.com, click on dealers, and get connected. Now, on with the podcast. Welcome to iDriveSoCal, the podcast all about mobility from the automotive capital of the United States, Southern California. Tom Smith here, and this is episode number 100. Hard to believe, 99 episodes behind us. What we're doing in episode 100 is I'm going to share a little bit of my opinion based on some facts, based on, a lot of research and journalistic effort that went behind putting together 99 episodes prior to this one, and just kind of talk about mobility big picture, because the reality is we're in Southern California. There's an ocean of cars stuck between where we are and where we want to go pretty much constantly. And, that's a big part of why I created iDriveSoCal to begin with. But, mobility for many people conjures up the image of Golden Girls, walkers, wheelchairs, and, the shops in the downtown areas and whatnot that sell those kinds of things. And sure, yeah, mobility's that. But in this world of fast moving innovation, technology, and startups, mobility is so very much more. And that's what we've started covering. That's what we're going to continue to cover. And that as well as automotive, right? Because automotive is just a huge part of our culture in Southern California, really the entire United States, as well as the world. I mean, that's how we've gotten around. And that's changing. And there's a number of areas where it's changing. So that's what this topic, this podcast here is going to be all about. So, and what's real and what's hype? And I can't help but conjure up the Simpsons episode with the traveling sales guy that comes to town and sells the monorail and gets the whole town doing the song, monorail, monorail, I wish I could afford to insert that song into this podcast, but I'm pretty sure that there'd be some copyright issues with the Simpsons folks. But so at any rate, lots of innovation is happening. That is undeniable. And we're going to categorically go through a handful of them. Startups, scooters, electric scooter companies, electric cars, driverless cars, flying driverless cars, hyperloops, underground highways with the whole boring company, electric aircraft, and space travel as well. And, the one thing that I didn't include, which I really wanted to know was, I think Richard Branson from Virgin was supposed to take us down to the depths of the oceans. So while we're doing all this mobility everywhere and even off the planet, interplanetary, what's going on with the bottom of our ocean? Our oceans. Have we really gotten down there yet? I don't know. That's a whole different topic, but just something that popped into my head. So, yes, iDriveSoCal, iDriveSoCal, easy for me to say. It started as my severe love of driving in cars, along with the equally severe loathing of sitting in traffic and not driving my car in all the traffic congestion. But there's so much car sharing and the sharing economy and whatnot that's been going on. But how has traffic been getting worse? I don't get that. Again, cue the Simpsons monorail with the whole sales guy that comes to town, takes the town's money and leaves them in a mess. I don't think that's what we're destined for, but in some areas, it's kind of like, what's up? I don't know. So we're going to talk a little bit about each of the categories that I mentioned. And again, those are startups, scooters, electric cars, driverless cars, flying driverless cars we'll touch on, hyperloops, the Underground Highway, again, the Boring Company, electric aircraft, and space travel. Briefly. So first, the scooter company, and one of the scooter companies. One of the very first podcasts that I did was with a friend of mine, Dale Seiden, who's one of the co-founders of an electric scooter company called Ojo Electric. And they're based out of California, right here, Santa Monica, actually. And there's another one that's based out of Santa Monica here called Bird. Now, Ojo's been around for a while, and they did a deal with Ford, and they're supposed to be distributing their Ojo scooters in Ford dealerships around the world. I haven't been in a Ford dealership recently and don't know if they're there. But I hope they're doing well. They're supposed to have a celebrity talent behind that too, of some sort, big Hollywood A-lister. But at any rate, so the interesting thing about Bird is you have, if you don't know what the Bird scooters are, they're these little, they look like the Razors actually that the kids used to ride around. But so there's the Bird scooters that are bigger for adults to ride, and the Bird scooters are competing with the Lime bikes and the Lime bike scooters. So the Lime bikes are those lime colored bikes that you've seen around in random locations. In Southern California here, I've seen them as far out as like strange industrial areas of Torrance in the South Bay. Which has been kind of weird. You just see a bike sitting there on the side of the road. The Bird and the Lime bike, or the Lime scooter, excuse me. Those seem to be more in the heavily populated areas. So I was at a recent talk at UCLA. And there was Birds sitting right next to the Lime bikes. But so, there's a whole nother element of the sharing economy and technology that's supposed to alleviate traffic. That's not alleviating traffic. And the other element of that is I find it kind of funny that these scooter companies, and they're unicorns, right? So Lime and Bird both came out to be, in the startup world, unicorns, $1 billion valuation company. Both of them have been valued at $1 billion, $1 billion with a B. And Bird is barely 2 years old. I mean, that's just crazy. I used to live in Marina Del Rey, and the Bird scooters were all over Marina Del Rey recently. That was one of their first stops, I think, that in Santa Monica. And apparently, some people were getting frustrated with literally stumbling over them coming out of bars in the evenings, stumbling over Bird scooters that are sitting around. So I guess you can't get a DUI on these things, but that's an interesting whole nother element of the equation with the scooters. But the last thing I want to touch on the scooters before we move on is the scooters are supposed to be the solution for, or at least in certain circles, that they're the solution for the final mile. Like, we get from point A to point B almost, and then we have that 1 mile left. So in theory, people actually take public transportation, a bus or a train or a commuter train here in Southern California. And you have that final mile that you just have to get, from that final mile, from point A to point B, or call it C, whatever. What's the final mile solution? It's like, well, the scooter's the final mile solution. Fantastic. I'm sorry, but isn't obesity and heart disease like pretty big problems that we're dealing with in the United States and really around the world? And maybe perhaps a final mile solution could be just all we have to do is look down, the old heel toe express. I don't know, just saying. But the scooters are cool. And the companies are obviously valued at big bucks. And hey, maybe down the line, the scooters could be a huge alleviation of the traffic congestion problem in our cities. We'll see. So the next part is the electric toes. The heel toe express and the electric car, two separate parts, but on my notes they were close together. So electric toes. Maybe that'll be the name of a new band coming up. Electric cars is our next topic here, and they're here. They're here to stay. There's no doubt. Traditional manufacturers are deep into their plans of releasing electric cars. From the performance perspective, electric cars are pretty impressive. You have torque that is incredible with electric cars, and you have a Tesla that has the whatever ludicrous speed, insanity speed, etc. So electric cars are here, and they're great, and they're going to proliferate. There's nothing. There's no denying that. I don't think in any of the auto manufacturers are denying that anymore. But the whole concept of zero emissions from electric cars is fantastic. The one question that I will throw out there, and I'm sure there's all kinds of solutions, but I'm just throwing it out there because it's my podcast. iDriveSoCal's my podcast, so I'm throwing this one out there. With all the zero emissions, that's fantastic. But when those batteries have run their lifetime, where do they wind up? Landfill? So that's something in the column of green and eco-friendly, in the column of not green and eco-friendly. Hey, the batteries winding up in a landfill is definitely a check in the not green and eco-friendly column. And the other element is the electricity for electric cars has got to come from somewhere. So where's that electricity coming from? Is it produced by coal? I know that's a topic, whatever political, but is it produced by a nuclear power plant? Where is that power coming from? Is it coming from solar? And if it's coming from solar, that's great, right? Because sun hits the solar panel on top of my house, that powers my converter and powers my car. Fantastic. However, what about the carbon footprint that was laid down to create that solar panel? And what about that solar panel itself? When its life cycle is done, where does it go? Is it back in that landfill next to the batteries? Just saying, I don't know. And the same could arguably go for hydropower or wind power. There are life cycles of that equipment that first it has to be manufactured. Second, it has to be run and maintained. Probably not a big carbon footprint on running and maintaining it, but then disposing it. So don't get me wrong. I'm not anti any of that stuff. I'm just posing some questions that I think are probably out there being posed, but maybe something that we need to think about too. One quick sidebar is my friends who drive the Priuses. I have many, and yes, you're great. You're eco-friendly, but my only thing about the Prius driver is, look, if you're going to have the eco-friendly car and save the environment, that's fantastic. Don't drive it aggressively like a complete knucklehead, because while you're saving the environment that we live in, you're like cutting people off and driving like a. Anyway, aggressive Prius drivers, it's just, they're starting to not bug me so much, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just getting older and more accepting. Moving on, driverless cars. We did a whole podcast on the levels of autonomous driving. Go to iDriveSoCal.com, and actually our search function on the website works really well. Just search for autonomous or levels of autonomous, and it'll pop right up with some other podcasts as well. But so the levels of autonomous driving podcast, we covered, there's 5 of them, as designated by the Society of Automotive Engineers, SAE. You've probably seen a little SAE on various things that are manufactured, but that's what SAE stands for, the Society of Automotive Engineers, and they're the ones that have been the governing, but not the governing body, but their designation for what these levels are. Each of the 5 levels of autonomous driving, those levels come from them. And really there's 6 because there's 0, right? There's no autonomous driving whatsoever. But then 5 is complete automation. And in order to have complete automation, you have a vehicle that needs an infrastructure, because the vehicle and the infrastructure need to talk to each other. So the idea of complete automation anywhere and everywhere is a long way out. And everybody knows that, because there's right? Terrain changes. You can't expect a car to take you from Vegas to Los Angeles completely autonomously, because there's way too many variables and the infrastructure is not there, or at least it's not currently there. That is a pretty popular roadway or whatnot. So maybe that'll get addressed sooner than we think. But so my thinking, again, this is the future of mobility, Tom's opinions, which my opinions could change, whatever they are now. They might change by the time I finish recording this podcast. Just kidding, maybe not that quickly. But I think this is what happens. And this is already what's happening in some of the testing areas. And that is the cities become the infrastructure that the autonomous driving or the vehicles that can drive autonomously work within. So within a geofenced area, the autonomous driving actually happens. And that's probably pretty soon. To a certain degree, I think that in the future, what will wind up happening is with driverless cars is that as we get into cities, as we drive our cars from whatever the suburbs to the city, I think you're going to get to a certain point in the city perimeter, where you don't have a choice, but you have to, in order to use your car in the city limits, in the city perimeter, you have to let the city grid take over your vehicle. And you're still in your vehicle, but you're hands off. You're then part of the grid. And in that case, traffic's gone. However, that doesn't mean wait times are gone. So you'll probably have to wait to get on the grid. And just like waiting for a train to go by, you'll have to wait in certain areas for variables while you're autonomously driving through the city. So yeah, traffic will be gone, but that doesn't mean that it's just going to be constant motion. You're going to go from point A to point B completely effortlessly. Now, I think also that you're going to have some groups and look, there's a lot of red tape that is going to have to be cut through in order to get through all of that and make this all a reality. But there's reality and there's what common sense and logic tell you. And look, Uber and Lyft have done. Whoever thought that they were really going to be able to become what they've become? I mean, Uber especially. We're going to talk about a whole thing that they're doing with flying cars and a NASA venture. We'll get into that in a couple minutes, but if anybody can cut through the red tape, some of these technology companies such as Uber and Lyft have proven that they can cut through the red tape of regulation and politics and whatnot, and do so successfully and become highly valued companies. So there's still going to be some groups that through this process are of course going to be standing up and raising concerns. And actually we did a podcast, one of our 99 podcasts that we did leading up to this 100th podcast was with the Consumer Watchdog Group. And they had an interesting point, actually. They said, look, if the car is taking over decision-making for humans, any machine is taking over decision-making for humans. Not always are our choices as humans one good, one bad. Sometimes you have only two bad choices, and then a car has to make the decision on one of those bad choices. So I think the example that the Consumer Watchdog Group representative shared with me was, look, you have a situation where a car's driving and and an accident's going to happen, a high likelihood of someone outside of the car getting injured, or a high likelihood of somebody inside the car getting injured. Who does the car decide gets injured? It's an interesting thing. It's like, okay, well, that's a pretty good point. But again, all this is being worked on. So that's driverless technology, and now flying cars. So with all the regulation and infrastructure issues that go into, excuse me, with all the infrastructure and regulation issues that go into driving on the ground, one would kind of think that maybe flying cars, there's not as much to hit. And if we can get everything that's flying to talk to each other, then maybe it's a lot easier to make the flying cars happen. But at any rate, the funny thing is, flying cars, I'm petrified of heights, petrified. But yet flying cars have been a boyhood fascination of mine, and I think a lot of people. I'm not alone in this one. I'm not alone in that. I'm not alone in my love of cars either. There's legions and millions of people, tens of millions, hundreds of people that are right there in the same boat. And that's my official survey, by the way. But flying cars, I'll never forget seeing the first Popular Mechanics cover of a flying car, and man, my wheels in my head were just turning, and it's like, man, if getting my driver's license represented freedom, and driving a car was like the next level of freedom, well, owning or driving a flying car was like utopian freedom. So that's still something. But now with drones, this is becoming a very real thing. And as I mentioned, Uber and Lyft, or excuse me, Uber and NASA have a joint venture that they're working on to bring flying cars to reality. And not only them, but also just in last week's newsletter we sent out, Audi and Airbus in Germany have a prototype. And Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, has actually designated a city where that prototype of the Audi Airbus union is going to be tested. And it looks like a car. It looks like a pod kind of thing with 4 drone type propellers on top. And, there you have it. So, I mean, the crazy old flying car where it was basically like a small car with wings on it, the freak of nature kind of looking thing. That's not what it is anymore. Now I don't think the notion or the functionality of driving on streets and flying are two so separate things that I think they're probably still going to be different. I think we'll probably have drones that people go into, and then eventually there'll be some kind of flying car when technology gets to a certain point. But we also have propulsion systems that we got to worry about. But yet again, something that we covered that we'll touch on, electric planes. Propulsion systems and making the batteries lighter. It's a very real thing. It's all happening. How much of it is hype? How much of it is real? I don't know. It seems like a lot of it's real. There's it's not without its hype. It's not without monorail barkers and whatnot. But a lot of it seems to be very real. And so then when you have flying cars, right, in Los Angeles, cars are flying all over the place, or drones are flying, whatever they're called, they're flying, and it's moving people and things. It seems like it would be easier because you don't have things to hit like you do on the ground. Obviously, air traffic control already has their FAAs, and air traffic control already has their hands full. But it seems that, if we can just make sure that the things that are flying around aren't hitting each other, common sense and logic would seem like that might be an easier play than autonomous driving on the ground. And then, very simply, if an accident occurs in the air, don't we have the technology to just make sure that a parachute pops out of the vehicle that we're flying around in, and we land gently on the ground, maybe with some airbags that keep us safe inside? I don't know. I'm just saying it seems to be out there. So then from flying cars, we have flying driverless cars. And this seems to be what the Uber and NASA thing is really working on. In fact, Uber Elevate is a conference that you probably have not heard of, but it's been happening for the last 2 years right here in Los Angeles. And it covers exactly that. It covers flying cars. It covers competitions and partnerships about how this is going to happen. A little startup competitions, what kind of vehicle, what kind of designs, what kind of propulsions, etc. Which, by the way, Uber Elevate, thanks a lot for not granting iDriveSoCal media credentials for this past Uber Elevate conference. Really appreciate that, guys, gals. And I'm being very facetious. We would like to cover this next year. So the next on the list is Hyperloops. And what's a Hyperloop? You've probably heard of it. It's basically like the blood vessels shooting through our veins. Hyperloop is an underground tunnel with a capsule that we, people and things, would theoretically be inside, and these capsules, the whole thing would be airtight. So the capsules, in theory, would not be able to run into each other, which is a good thing because they're running at such high speeds that if they did run into each other somehow, I think the only thing that would be left over would be like greasy vapor. So there's that. There's the Hyperloop thing, and we'll see how that impacts traffic. Hopefully, traffic congestion will be alleviated by way of Hyperloops. Then you also have the underground highway / electric railway thing that Elon Musk has been working on by way of his Boring Company. So the Boring Company has been kind of a weird thing. You got to hand it to Elon for being a pretty darn good promoter, not to mention a brilliant engineer and savvy billionaire, and entrepreneur. Hey, what else is he? But so the Boring Company is this company that's boring tunnels underneath. Was supposedly boring tunnels underneath the city of Los Angeles, and they're based here in LA. But there's a big question mark around that because they're very quiet. They're very kind of secretive. You go to their website, and the website has actually recently changed. Before they had, the website was kind of focused on LA. Now it seems, I was just on the website earlier today, and it seems the whole website mentioning LA is now gone. And it talks about what it's going to do in Chicago, the Boring Company, and make the trip from Chicago O'Hare to downtown Chicago much easier. So I don't know what happened with the LA thing. Elon, is there tunnels underneath Los Angeles that the Boring Company has been working on? I'm not sure. I'd love to check them out. And in fact, so going back to the brilliant promoter that Elon Musk is, the Boring Company you may have heard about the hats that the Boring Company was pitching. I actually bought a couple of hats myself because they were selling hats apparently to raise a couple bucks. I think like 10 million bucks, whatever they raised, 5 million bucks. And they were selling hats, and it was just simply a Boring Company hat, whatever. No big deal. Black hat with a white logo. But I think 10 of the hat purchasers would be picked randomly from a drawing, and if you won that drawing, you would get to go visit the Boring Company tunnels, so under Los Angeles. So I've not heard anything about that happening. So what's up with? Are there tunnels under Los Angeles? What's up with the Boring Company in Los Angeles? I don't know. Would love to know. The other element of Elon Musk's brilliant promotional expertise is the flamethrowers. Yes, in fact, there is the Boring Company flamethrower, later called not a flamethrower because some government entities were going to disallow the shipment of flamethrowers or something called a flamethrower. So the cutesy spin was, okay, we're going to call these things not a flamethrower. So if you know about this, you've probably seen the one picture that's, well, they have two pictures. They have one picture of the actual flamethrower, and it looks like a flamethrower with a Boring Company logo on it. And then you have a little, whatever it is, the GIF thing, or it's a little video picture, and there's two people, a guy and a girl, in a dark setting, both holding flamethrowers, and the motion part of the picture is flame shooting out of the flamethrower. So those, I think the hats were like 20 or 40 bucks a pop. The flamethrowers are like 500 bucks a pop. So one of my buddies said, you know what? He actually bought the flamethrower. Of course, they haven't been delivered yet, but he ventures to guess that the flamethrower is actually going to be Bitcoin. So we'll see. So there's the underground highway, and supposedly the boring company. I'm way off tangent on that one. So the boring company is drilling these big underground tunnels so that we can drive our cars to elevators that will then take us down to the tunnels, and then in those tunnels, our car will sit on like an electric rail that will also be very high speed moving, but will be regulated, but will be in our car. So it'll be like a high speed people mover that you put your car on. And kind of like going through the airport, right? You get on the escalator that is just flat. I don't know what those things are called, but it's that concept for the car. And when you get to your point that you're going, your car is elevated back up to street level, and then you drive around in the rest of traffic as normal. So that's the boring company. Now, electric aircraft, another podcast we did with a company right here in Southern California, Ampere, working out of the Arts District downtown, out of the LA Clean Tech Incubator. And Ampere is a startup company that is making electric aircraft, or supporting the electric aircraft initiative anyway. They actually have a prototype, which is really cool. We have pictures of it on the podcast. Just go Google, or don't Google, go to iDriveSoCal.com. And again, our search function works really well. So type in electric aircraft and that podcast will pop up. I can't remember what number it is as far as the iDSC number. iDSC standing for iDriveSoCal. All of our podcasts have an iDSC number. But at any rate, so Ampere was one of our first ones. And I sat with the CEO of Ampere, super smart guy, and interesting because, Southern California is not only automotive capital of the world, but it's also an automotive capital, it's also a capital of transportation. And I asked Ampere, why here? Why Southern California? And the CEO's reply was, look, we were all aeronautical engineers, JPL from Jet Propulsion Laboratory or Raytheon or whomever else. But there's a big it's all the way back to the Hughes aircraft, right? Howard Hughes. There's a big piece of the aviation world right here in Los Angeles, in Southern California. So all of these guys were working that started Ampere. All these guys were working at these different companies, and they got together to start Ampere, the first electric aircraft company. And what these guys are doing is literally figuring out what needs to happen as far as the guts of the aircraft that needs to come out, that drives the jet propulsion, the combustion engine. I guess it is. I think jet engines are combustion engines. I think that is. And then make it electric. So it's a very quiet ride. Apparently they have on the drawing board, and this is about a year old it's about 6 months, 7 months old podcast now. And I think what Kevin, the CEO, is telling me is that should be in about 6 months from now ish, they're going to be ready to take their first test flight with the electric aircraft. And it's not going to be, mass jumbo jet ready, but they will be able to do 9-passenger regional air travel. So if you want to take an electric aircraft to Vegas, or if you want to take an electric aircraft over to Catalina Island, check. You're going to be able to do that. And basically you just take all the guts out of an aircraft as is, out of it, that is part of the current propulsion system, and exchange that for batteries that are high tech enough, that can produce enough energy to propel an aircraft. That's crazy. That's not so much going to help traffic, but that electric aircraft technology is going to potentially help the flying cars, which obviously would help traffic. Now, finally, there's space travel, right? You got Jeff Bezos, you got Elon Musk, you got Richard Branson, you got whomever else, all taking us off of this planet. And the interesting thing is, all the tech that we've talked about prior is going to be completely irrelevant if we're just leaving the planet anyway. So we're just going to take all this technology with us to the next planet that we inhabit as we colonize the universe. So the ironic thing is, you very well may be listening to this podcast while stuck in traffic in Southern California or somewhere else. And sorry if you're stuck in traffic right now. That's a bummer. But again, that's why I started this thing. One of the many reasons anyway. But that brings us to the basic of it. And that is, I'm not the only one. I mentioned this before. I'm not the only one that loves cars. Lots of us love cars. You probably love cars. There's tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of us in the United States alone that love cars and cars in Southern California. One of the things that we've realized with iDriveSoCal is, we post really cool car shows and automotive related events or mobility related events on our events page. And that gets a ton of traction. There's a lot of people out there searching for automotive related, mobility related things to do with their free time. So we've kind of struck a vein here, and we're having a lot of fun with it. Actually, another podcast, if I can pimp/promote another one of our podcasts, is the Professor's Awesome Auto Show June. We actually did a podcast talking about Clinton Kwan, our professor here at iDriveSoCal. We did a podcast talking about his excitement about the month of June. There's always all these killer auto shows going on in the month of June. So we sent the professor out to 5 different auto shows in the month of June in 4 weeks within the month of June. And then we covered podcasts on all of those. So check those out too. But that brings us kind of full circle to, mobility is still now cars. And while it is the future, it's currently in Southern California and cities across the United States as well as around the world. It's still cars. In San Diego, it's still cars. In Los Angeles, it's very much cars. In all of Southern California, it's very much cars. Inland Empire, everywhere. So with that in mind, we have retail partners, automotive retail partners who we know and love and work with that literally have become our friends. And we want to drop their name into our 100th podcast here as a thank you. Rock Honda out in the Los Angeles suburb of Fontana. Those guys are great out there. If you're looking for a Honda, definitely connect with these guys. Worth the drive to Fontana. Trust me when I say this. David Latif, the general manager. Ahmed Javid, the general sales manager. I guess his title is Veronica Roscoe, one of the sales managers. Ruben Cerna, who's the service director, and Oli Garcia, who is an internet guy that is going to be kind of the go-to. We'll post his information soon on iDriveSoCal. By the time you listen to this, it'll probably be posted there, so you can connect directly with him. If you want to go get a Honda. Another mention, Ontario Volkswagen in the Los Angeles suburb of Ontario, California. You're looking for a VW, Farfig Nugan, baby. Definitely worth the drive out to Ontario Volkswagen. See Earl Reed, the general manager, Scott Reed, his son, and also the sales manager, Randy Halcomb, the internet guru and kind of our go-to. And Randy actually, we just did a podcast with Randy. He's putting his cell phone out there. So you want a Volkswagen, you call Randy directly on his cell phone and, let him know that you're from iDriveSoCal. And then Jim Straley is the service director out there. And, I mentioned the service directors when I talk about our automotive partners, because when we get cars, we spend a lot of time researching, we spend a little time buying, but then we spend the next handful of years, even if you're just leasing, dealing with the maintenance and taking care of the car. So the service directors and the service departments of automotive dealerships are really important. Don't forget that one. So as we move forward from episode 100, thank you so much for listening. It's been a heck of a lot of fun, a ton of work, a heck of a lot of work, heck of a lot of fun, but it's not work when you love what you do, right? And these are topics that I really love researching and learning about and sharing with you. So thank you very much for listening. And as we've been doing with a lot of our podcasts in the gallery, we've been adding on iDriveSoCal.com. You can listen to the podcast, but then you can also check out the photo gallery. And because we've covered so much ground in this podcast, I'm going to share a little personal information as well as tell you that the only pictures in this gallery are going to be of my 9-month son, who, speaking of mobility, has become very, very mobile. I am so head over heels in love with my boy. It's not even funny. He's my first child, and my wife and I are just completely in love. Every parent out there knows exactly what I'm saying. So thank you for allowing me to join your ranks. It's a very, very special thing. But at any rate, my 9-month-old son, the pictures that you'll see on this podcast post are of him mostly, some with me, and in his mode of transportation, which is a stroller. So really, that's full circle. That mobility is lots of different things to lots of different people, including my 9-month-old son. And in fact, one of the pictures is from he and I at the airport. We had just landed in O'Hare, and we go to Chicago, which is where I'm from, actually. We go to Chicago each year for a big conference for my wife's organization, which is called Hope for Stomach Cancer. And we're going to another quick personal plug here before we wrap it up. So bear with me. But Hope You Never Need the organization, but Hope for Stomach Cancer is a patient advocacy organization for anyone that has been diagnosed with stomach cancer. It's a super deadly disease. We're here to help. HopeForStomachCancer.org or stocan.org, and all kinds of resources there should you or someone you know be diagnosed with stomach cancer. Super deadly disease. But my wife got my father-in-law through it a number of years back, and we started this nonprofit organization by way of paying forward the blessing of still having my father-in-law with us. So I think that is a wrap for this iDriveSoCal podcast. By far our longest. I have rambled. If you've listened to the very end, thank you so much for listening. And truly, if you've listened to the very end, here's the payoff. Not I don't know if you consider this a payoff or not. My email address, my personal email address, if you ever want to send me a note, would love to hear from you. Tom@iDriveSoCal.com. Tom@iDrive, D-R-I-V-E, SoCal, SoCal.com. Shoot me a note. Let me know what you want us to cover. Thoughts, rants, raves, whatever. We'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear from you. Seriously, thank you for listening. Thanks for checking out the pics of my son on this podcast post. And until next time, I'm Tom Smith. Again, thank you for listening to iDriveSoCal. We'll talk to you soon.
This episode was engineered and edited by Micah Palmquist.
Hey there. Still wanting more iDriveSoCal content? Just go to iDriveSoCal.com. From there, you can subscribe to our podcast and newsletter. And you can connect with one of our awesome car dealer partners to get yourself a sweet new high-tech wonder on wheels. And oh yeah, we always want to hear from you. So please connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. Or if you're not a big social media-ite, you can email us suggestions for stories, people, places, or events you think we should cover. Here's the address: media@iDriveSoCal.com. That's media, MEDIA, at the letter I, drive, DRIVE, SoCal, SoCal.com. Media@iDriveSoCal.com. Thanks again for listening, and definitely reach out with whatever's on your mind.